We have an ongoing disagreement between the IT not owning the data. As a department analyst, we do create data, but have no control over the data that is being created. We
Yeah.
can create the reports or generate information, but the control of the data is in IT.
Yeah.
So how can IT not be the owner of the data if they control it?
This is great. So the data is born into your organization, and it is born into your organization through the individuals that are contributing to the data. And IT makes data. They are adding data that's IT related. But your company, and as you're creating these transactions, that's where the data is being born. The data itself should be owned by the people that are creating it. If it's in the business being created, then that data is owned by business. The IT owns the data containers and the health and well-being of that data throughout the pipeline and travel. They own the integration process, the quality of the programming that transfers that data. That is all owned by IT. So if business is creating the data, and this is often an area that I do a lot of focus, and I try to make it as fun and gentle as possible, because there's a lot of trepidation around this. It's like our IT doesn't own the data and they refuse to own the data. And I'm like, how do I turn that conversation to say that IT owns the data container, the quality of the container, the quality of the code that moves that data, and they owe you transparency on the adverse events, and to be able to know to the people that are creating the data that they're getting that feedback of how well or how poorly they're creating their data.
Usually business doesn't see the direct benefit of
benefits.
data quality activities and see it has extra work. How enroll business and make them stakeholders? Any
Yes,
recommendation on that?
that is a
It's a very good
fantastic question. Thank you very much for that question. So when, again, you heard me say that I don't post a data quality rule, and when I have an adverse data event, I always track it back to the root cause and who in the business is the leadership of that area, so that they are aware that when I say that this adverse data event cost this much, and it's in your area. So if you have an upstream application that upgraded and they didn't communicate to the data pipeline and data engineers that this change was happening and it broke 7 reports, they need to know that it cost the organization this much in degradation and confidence, and how many people it took to fix those events, and the chaos that it caused. You're making sure that the organization, either in IT or in the departments. The other thing I want to point out, that with data governance, when they start putting their terms together and they're working in data governance, they start seeing how dependent the rest of the organization is on the data that they're creating. That transparency starts to happen, and they're like, wow, I never knew that people thought this about this piece of information. So a lot of that activity happens, but I do oftentimes help customers with the reinforcement that the data is owned by the business and the data container and transportation is owned by technology, because sometimes they don't recognize that. So there's a series of very soft awakening exercises that we go through to help reinforce that.
I also have a theory here, is that when the data is consumption layer, when we are consuming the data, what kind of decisions are we making on those decisions on that data? So for example, this is a audit financial report, then there is not a single error is even acceptable. Suppose the report is going to the compliance, a single error in that will create a very high risk for your organization. It's very critical. Suppose you are making a supply chain assessment, and you are creating a order of inventory, right? And let's say the inventory is supposed to order 1 million objects, instead of 900,000 came up, and suddenly you are less of 100,000, or you order extra, right? So those are, I would say, the decisions are very, very critical to your organization, and the criticality of the business decisions directly dependent upon that data, and that is directly dependent upon the quality of the data.
Right.
So I think that if I have a report which is saying how many bugs in the system have it, for the software application team, it is highly critical information for them.
Right.
For non-business software application, they're like, oh, okay, I don't care about it. But for software owns a lot about like how many bug this software have it.
Yeah.
The same thing is that it dependent upon the criticality of the decisions you're taking from that, and then it backward tracks from that.